Booyah! We are live, ladies and gentlemen. Is populism a threat to democracy? Well, U.S. Representative Nancy Pelosi believes so. Pelosi recently took part in an Oxford Union debate on this very subject, where she made the case that populism has become synonymous with ethno-nationalism and right-wing extremism. Arguing against this position was Winston Marshall, a former member of the musical group Mumford Sons. What role does populism play in American politics? Is it something that should be embraced or rejected by pro-liberty advocates? Join us as we talk about all this and more on episode 449 of the In the Tank podcast. Booyah! Welcome to the In the Tank podcast. As always, I'm your host, Donald Kendal. Joining me today, I've got a full crew. I've got Jim Lakely, VP of the Heartland Institute. How are you doing today, good sir?
I'm doing just great. I'm taking, what do they call it on Bridget Jones's Diary? A little mini break coming up this weekend. I'm heading down to Texas to take in some baseball games with some old college buddies. So, I almost never take a vacation. So this is one of my last official duties before taking a little mini break. So yay me.
Always referencing Bridget Jones's Diary is Jim Lakely. Also joining us,
movie.
We have Justin Haskins, director of the Socialism Research Center here at the Heartland Institute. How are you doing today, good sir?
I'm doing good. Unlike Bridget Jones over there, I'm not taking any breaks. I don't believe in breaks. The left won't stop, so I won't stop either. So that just shows you how committed I am, which is why I'm here right now. Yeah.
Fantastic. And Chris Talgo, he is editorial director here at the Heartland Institute. How are you doing today, good sir? Fresh off the war room, Chris Talgo, I should say. That's his new title. What's going on?
Oh, well, I'm doing good because I've never seen Bridget Jones's Diary. So that's all I have to say about that.
Yeah, well, yeah.
And if I were to watch it, it probably would ruin my day.
Oh, I don't know what.
Sorry, Jim. I know you're a big fan of Bridget Jones, but sorry, I'm not.
The real vacation is him going to the set where that was shot. Right. He's a huge fan. Anyways,
everyone knows it was shot in Texas, right, Jim?
Is that right?
For sure.
Audio only listeners, before we get into the rest of our topics here, I always put this message at the beginning of the episode. If you're listening to this audio only, probably catching it on a Friday or later, you can join us a day earlier on Thursdays at noon, where we are live streaming this on Facebook and YouTube and Rumble and X. And you can join the conversations, throw your comments and questions in the chat. Maybe we'll show your comment on the screen. Maybe we'll address your questions on the fly. Also, you could help out the show by supporting us using that super chat functionality. We have that enabled if you want to guarantee your comment or question is read on air. Also, you can help out the show by not spending $1, just spending a couple of seconds, hitting that like button, sharing this content, subscribing if you haven't already, or just leaving a comment under the video. All those things help break through those big tech algorithms that prevent content like this from being shown to more people. Almost got through that. So lots to talk about today, but first things first, big important development just in the last couple of days. We have seemingly confirmation of the first presidential debate that Trump has been taking part in since 2020. He and Joe Biden will seemingly, as far as I'm aware, be facing off two separate times. One seemingly pretty early, June 27th on CNN. The second one, September 10th on ABC. So this news also comes with a pretty funny video of Joe Biden kind of taunting Donald Trump. So why don't we start off with that video, and we'll make fun of Joe Biden a little bit. Go ahead and play that video.
Donald Trump lost 2 debates to me in 2020. And since then, he hadn't shown up for debate. Now he's acting like he wants to debate me again. Well, make my day, pal. I'll even do it twice. So let's pick the dates, Donald. I hear you're free on Wednesdays.
Wow, how intimidating must Donald Trump feel when you've got a very, very elderly man like Joe Biden throwing shade at him like that? If you're a video watcher, if you're watching the video of this podcast, and you'll see that Jim edited that clip, not by actually cutting anything. He just added the little number that kept track of how many cuts were in that video. Jim, why don't you fill us in about that little aspect of the video?
Well, yeah, and I hope my audio is now okay, since I completely forgot to plug in my podcast mic, so hopefully everybody can hear me all right. That's an 11-second fake Mr. Tough Guy debate challenge video, and there are 5 cuts,
right,
in 11 seconds. So Joe Biden could not get through his fake tough guy act for a whole 11 seconds. And in fact, his average, I guess then, was about 2.1 seconds of actual coherence before they had to cut and do that again. That is quite something. And this debate should be quite something. And actually, I'm actually surprised there's going to be a debate. I'm actually pretty interested that the first debate is going to be in June, and then there won't be another one until September. That's very curious. We've never had a debate this early in a presidential cycle before. But, it makes sense with all this early voting. I mean, don't we all just have an entire year to vote for president? Isn't that pretty much how it is in this country now anyway? So at least we get a debate before most of the mailed out ballots are mailed back in to choose our president. But I think the moderators are CNN, be on CNN and ABC News. So it'll just be really interesting to see how the media, how CNN and ABC are basically going to do the debate part for Joe Biden. They're going to be the ones advocating for Joe Biden, because I don't think he'll be able to advocate very well for himself. Should be pretty interesting.
Justin, how excited are you? There has been a little bit of talk about whether or not RFK Jr. is going to be in the debate. Apparently, one of the thresholds that has to be met is whether or not he, in polling in 4 separate major polls, gets 15% or higher. And according to one of the articles, I don't have it in the show notes, I was just reading it before we went live, his campaign manager was confident that RFK Jr. would meet those criteria to be involved in the debates. However, both campaigns, Trump and Biden, were very adamant that no, he's not going to be included. So odds that he's going to be included, and just general thoughts on the debate that might be coming up soon.
Well, I know that he's been making these claims that he's meeting the requirements, or that he will meet the requirements, but he's actually not. There's one particular part of the requirements that he isn't going to meet. He hasn't met yet, and he's conspicuously leaving this out. The part of the requirement is that his name is RFK Jr., and anyone named RFK Jr. is not going to be allowed on the stage. That's by far the most important requirement. There is literally 0% chance that this man, and the closest he will ever get to the stage is if he sneaks into the event and is seated somewhere in the balcony. That's the closest he'll ever get. They will not let him anywhere near even the front row of the audience. He will be nowhere near that debate stage. Nowhere near that debate stage. For obvious reasons. I don't even think we need to get into that. If it weren't for the fact that I disliked RFK Jr. so much, I would feel bad for him, because he really has been very badly treated as a candidate, just objectively. If we're looking at it objectively throughout this whole process, I mean, the Democratic Party, he ran as a Democratic Party candidate. He didn't run as an independent. That's how it started. And they basically made the rules in such a way and that he had no chance of actually becoming the nominee. They did not give him fair treatment at all. The media has badly mistreated him throughout this whole process. And now they're going to keep him off of the debate stage, even though he has he has more support of any third party candidate since Ross Perot. Like, there's not been a single third-party candidate since Ross Perot who has this level of support in the polls,
Sure.
and they're going to keep him off of the debate stage for sure. So, I mean, like I said, if I didn't dislike him so much, I would think that he's and believe that he was, an authoritarian and, a climate alarmist and all the other things that I think about him. I'd feel really bad for him. That said,
he hasn't been that. He hasn't had those positions since the brain worm ate half of his brain. So that did change his position on something.
That's true. It could have been the brain worm talking. I don't know. With all that said, the most important thing is that this debate should not be happening. So I think this is a massive, massive mistake. I think it's a massive mistake.
Dog-faced pony soldier.
No,
He's
you know what?
You
know what, Joe? I actually think this works out better for Joe. I think this works out much better for Joe because the bar going into this for Joe Biden is so freaking low. All he has to do is not die, and he'll be okay. If he doesn't, even if he has one of his moments where he's just stumbling around, rambling, talking about kids playing with his leg hair in the pool, like, it won't even really matter all that much. Everyone already knows that that's who he is. And so what is the worst case scenario for him? The worst case scenario is he gets up there and he looks like an angry old white man, like he has every single day he's been president of the United States and all of the days leading up to the election. So what are we going to learn from this that we don't already know? And then on the flip side, right, all the people, Donald Trump's best chance of winning is that a lot of people who don't like his personality, have to look past his personality and say, Joe Biden's been such a disaster that I don't really care that Donald Trump is not a good guy, or I don't like him, or I don't like the way he talks, or I don't like his tweets and all of that, because Joe Biden's been a failure, right? But when you throw Donald Trump up on the debate stage, you are now confronted with the things that many of these middle of the road voters don't like. And they're going to be reminded for 2 hours why they don't like Donald Trump. And he's going to be hurling insults at Joe Biden and just, to me, I see absolutely no advantage whatsoever to these two people debating each other from a conservative perspective. I just see absolutely no positives whatsoever.
You benefits is people like us that get to watch this, because I would be tuning in not for their positions on policy and all of this stuff, but pure entertainment, folks. Chris,
and hold on, wait, before we go to Chris, just touching on that point, it's not going to be entertaining, because what's going to happen is this is going to be far left-wing people who hate Donald Trump asking all the questions. They're going to slant this thing so heavily in Joe Biden's favor that you're just going to be sitting screaming at the television set throughout this whole thing. And it's going to be frustrating. It's not going to be enjoyable. It's going to be painful. That's what I think. I think it's going to be the most painful debate we've ever seen.
Put a pin in that, because I have a question that relates to that for Jim after I talk to Chris here. Chris, what are you expecting from this debate? Do you think it'll be entertaining? Do you think it'll be very similar to the past Trump versus Biden debates? What do you expect to see on June 27th?
Well, first, I agree with Justin. I think that Joe Biden's greatest strength is his sheer weakness, because I worry that he's going to come across as a bumbling old man, and Donald Trump is going to come across as someone who's bullying like the bumbling old man. And, no one wants to watch someone, in Joe Biden's, shape, get, bullied by somebody. So it's like, I think that there's going to be a sympathetic appeal to Biden and his, old man, act. I also think that the way that debate is structured with no audience is probably going to help Donald Trump, because I think Donald Trump is a showman and he feeds off the audience. So the fact that there's going to be no audience there, I think Donald Trump's going to come in less hot than he did in the
wait. There's no audience?
Yeah, there's no audience.
No.
What?
Yeah, there's no audience.
This is a joke.
The rules are it's like each candidate gets 2 minutes and their mic gets cut off. So I don't think we're going to see a repeat of the first debate. If you guys remember that with Chris Wallace, where it was just Donald Trump had a lot to say, and I agreed with what he was saying, but it was how he was saying it and the constant interruptions really, I think, like Justin said, made him lose appeal with women voters and those who were on the fence. So I think that the structure of this debate is probably going to help Donald Trump, because there's going to be no audience and Donald Trump can come in and really just try to keep it policy based. We shall see. I also think it's interesting that they have gone around the Presidential Debate Commission, and now the two campaigns are just negotiating this on their own. So I think this is possibly the end of the era of the Presidential Commission, which I think is probably a good thing.
Well, there'll be no live audience, but I do understand there will be a laugh track. So we have that.
Jim, we flirted with the idea of doing like a live reaction video before. Once we were pretty close to pulling the trigger on a recent Joe Biden State of the Union address. This could be the one. What do you think, Jim?
Yeah, I think we could actually do a live stream while streaming the debate. I think that'd be actually quite a lot of fun. So now you've already publicly said it. So now we probably now have to make sure our schedules are clear.
It's a Thursday night, so it would be on a in the tank night.
It would be on an in the tank night. Yeah, so it'd be a bonus in the tank. I have to, as long as we can, have a few adult beverages while doing it, warming up to it.
Yeah, we'll make a drinking game out of it.
Then we're all off on Friday then. God.
Yes, right. All right, well, yes, don't get too excited, Christine. Actually, I don't know, get excited. We'll see. We'll keep everyone posted. Tune in between now and then, and, if we pull the trigger on that. If we get a lot of support for that, if we see a lot of people clamoring for that, that would definitely encourage us to do it. But yeah.
Johnny, just one more quick point. So voting begins September 13th, which is unbelievable. So it is good that they're having this debate before early voting begins, but I'm just still shocked that now we have this giant window. Whatever happened to voting day? Are we ever going to go back to voting day?
No, we're not.
So now we have this 2-month wide open window in which ballots are just being just being mailed in all throughout the country. And it's not about who gets the most votes. It's who has the best ground game and who can return the most ballots. That's what American elections have come to. And that's a really sad state of affairs.
Yeah, just you suggesting that there should be an election day is voter suppression. I'm going to turn you into the authorities, Chris. But
well, can I just say one more quick thing on that? A couple of years ago, I was asked to write a op-ed about making the election day a national holiday, and I was expressly against it. I have changed my tune 100% on that. I think if we were to say, okay, let's make election day a national holiday, everyone, it's a federal holiday, everyone gets it off, that would also put a big pin in the balloon of this whole voter suppression thing, because then you could say, wait a second, it's a holiday. Like there's no excuse. Also in Europe, I think a lot of countries actually vote on Saturdays. So that's another thing we might consider.
Let's consider it. All right, Justin, think about it. June 27th. Plan on being there for the live stream. Day. You're not busy that day.
He'll be organizing his hat collection on that day. He's already put
June 27th. Oh, okay. June 27th. I see. That is a Thursday. You're right. I don't know. I can't. I gotta talk to my people, but I'll get back to you.
I'll have my people talk to your people.
Okay, that's fine.
All right. So, like I mentioned at the top of the broadcast, our former Speaker of the House and all-around lovely woman, Nancy Pelosi, took part in a debate at the Oxford Union. The subject was, is populism a threat to democracy? Nancy Pelosi took the yes it is position, whereas the former member of Mumford Sons took the no it's not position.
It's quite a debate.
And it was quite a debate. A lot of hand gestures from Nancy Pelosi. But it was Jim that brought this debate to my attention, and I'm glad he did. Because while I was watching the debate, it became clear to me that this question turns out to be pretty central to the current political discourse here in America and seemingly throughout the rest of the world. And perhaps more importantly, Pelosi's stance on the question is very revealing as to the mindset of the ruling class. So I do want to start off by playing some clips, and then we can get into some of it and kind of see where the discussion brings us. But I think that it's important to define our terms. So I want to just right off the bat, just, because we're probably going to say populism a lot during the show. I want to define populism. And actually, I don't want to define it. I want ChatGPT to define it. So I typed in my computer, in my phone here, what is populism, ChatGPT? It says populism is a political approach that seeks to represent the interests and voices of ordinary people, often pitting them against a perceived elite or establishment. It is characterized by the following features: anti-elitism, people-centric rhetoric, us versus them mentality, a direct appeal, flexible ideology, and a charismatic leader. It says populism can manifest in various forms and can significantly impact political discourse and policy, often leading to increased polarization and changes in the political landscape. So before we go any further, Chris, Justin, Jim, anyone have any objection to the ChatGPT generated definition of populism?
No,
Okay, good. Well, see,
you'll
the
never
power
catch
of
me
artificial
publicly opposing AI. So
intelligence. Yeah,
I'm
that's
much too afraid of what will happen
Not-
in the future for
right.
that.
Yeah, not when he's being recorded. He won't.
No.
All right, so it looks like that's the definition we're going with. Jim, as I mentioned, you brought this to my attention. Do you want to do a little further setup on this? Maybe we could play some clips. I'm gonna let you kind of run with this topic a little bit.
Yeah. I mean, just to set this up, I mean, on X/Twitter the other week, I saw that Winston Marshall and Mumford Sons was trending. And normally, I might click on it. It's like, I don't know why that would be, but I would click on it just to see what the hubbub was about and then move on. Usually don't even drill in and read. But then I saw why he was trending. Winston Marshall, he's one of the founding members of Mumford Sons, a multi-Grammy award-winning group. Banjo and guitar player for them. Not a lot of banjo players in the UK, so he kind of stood out with his sound and with his band. And he was kicked out of Mumford & Sons, what is it, I think a year ago, for on Twitter suggesting to his followers that, hey, this journalist called Andy No, who's been covering the Antifa riots across the country starting in the summer of love of 2020, he's written a book about his coverage of Antifa, and it's pretty interesting. Maybe you guys should check it out. That got him canceled by his own band because the left went after Mumford & Sons, and I guess maybe they had a vote, and the other members of the band decided that, it's better that maybe we can sell records from this day forward and just kick out this guy that the radical leftists thought went over the line by simply recommending a book of journalism by one of the few journalists brave enough to go into the mobs with his camera phone and record what was going on and the violence and radical Marxism that was being shouted in all of these places. So he got kicked out of the band, and now apparently he has started his own podcast. He's got a Substack. And of course, he's collecting lots of royalties from every time you hear Mumford & Sons when you're shopping for groceries. So good on him. But so I decided to watch then I saw that he was in a debate at the Oxford Union, the most prestigious debating society on earth. And I thought, gosh, I wonder how he did. And he did spectacularly well. And his opponent of all people was Nancy Pelosi. And again, the question was, is populism, I believe specifically the question was, is populism a threat to democracy? And he, of course, took the position, since he's not a hard radical leftist, he took the position that populism is democracy, that populism is a reflection of the will of the people. And if your society does not reflect the will of the people, you do not live in a democracy. And so I thought, this is an opportunity for us, one, to show some clips of this guy, who again is a rock musician and is very, very intelligent and speaks very, very well about topics and from positions that we would agree with. And also just to get into this discussion, because it's coming, because the left has been attacking populism for quite a while. They called Trump a populist, and that's not supposed to be a compliment. It's supposed to be a warning to independent voters or others to help set this narrative that if the people get to choose Donald Trump as president, then this country is in big trouble. So let's go ahead and play our first clip from Winston.
Populism has become a word used synonymously with racist. We've heard ethno-nationalist, with bigot, with hillbilly, redneck, with deplorables. Elites use it to show their contempt for ordinary people. This is a recent change. Not long ago, Barack Obama, while still president at the North America's Leaders Summit in June 2016, he took umbrage with the notion that Trump be called a populist. How could Trump be called a populist? He doesn't care about working people. If anything, Obama argued, he was the populist. If anything, Obama argued, Bernie was the populist. It was Bernie who'd spent 5 decades fighting for working people. But Trump. Something curious happens. If you watch Obama's speeches after that point, more and more recently, he uses the word populist interchangeably with strongman, with authoritarian. The word changes meaning. It becomes a negative, a pejorative, a slur.
Yeah, I think this kind of highlights one of the more important parts of the conversation that I want to get into, and that is this idea that because I think like lately, anyone that turns on any sort of media would definitely get the sense that populism, populist is this negative connotation term. Donald Trump's a populist. He's just trying to rile up all of this, nationalist anger, whatever, all of that sort of thing. And that's essentially what Nancy Pelosi's entire case was during this debate, was trying to hammer that point home. And because of that, and because he can rally all of these basket of deplorables, to use Hillary Clinton's term, that it represents a threat, and it can manifest into the insurrection of January 6th and all of that sort of stuff. That was basically her central case there. But what he pointed out was that this is actually more of a recent development, and that, for the left, populism wasn't so tied to this ethno-nationalism or whatever terms that she was throwing around. And that Obama himself declared himself more of a populist than Donald Trump. It's like there was a competition of who's more populist. Are we the left, Obama, or is it Donald Trump? We actually have that clip, Jim, of Obama kind of making this case, and it was like a 1.5-minute clip, but Obama has a lot of awkward pauses in between his statements, so Jim trimmed it up here. So there's probably going to be as many jump cuts in this video as there was in the Joe Biden one we started off the show with. But go ahead, just to prove our case here, let's play that Obama clip if we have that ready.
I suppose that makes me a populist. Now, somebody else who has never shown any regard for workers, has never fought on behalf of social justice issues or making sure that poor kids are getting a decent shot at life or have health care, in fact, have worked against economic opportunity for workers and ordinary people. They don't suddenly become a populist because they say something controversial in order to win votes. It's not the measure of populism. That's nativism or xenophobia or worse, or it's just cynicism. So I would just advise everybody be careful about suddenly attributing to whoever pops up at a time of economic anxiety the label that they're populists. Where have they been? Have they been on the front lines working on behalf of working people? Have they been carrying the laboring order to open up opportunity for more people? Now, there are people like Bernie Sanders who I think genuinely deserve the title because he has been in the vineyards fighting on behalf of these issues. And there, the question is just going to be, all right, we share values, we share goals, how do we achieve them?
All right, Justin, I want to go to you first on this because That's not an ancient clip. That's from 2016. That's Barack Obama in 2016, basically being defensive over, no, we're the populists. It's not Donald Trump. And then turn it to now, where Nancy Pelosi is basically saying that populism is akin to like being a Nazi or something like that. So is it just like, is there just been like a wild rejection of that idea of pursuing, populist ideas just in the past, 7-8 years? What do you think?
No, I mean, I don't. So I think part of the problem is with any of these kinds of discussions is that we're, you started this whole thing off by saying, well, if we're going to have a discussion about this, then we need to define our terms. And then we all agreed on, a reasonable definition of what populism means. But the problem is when you start looking at what left-wing, well, really politicians in general, but left-wing politicians in particular start saying, you have to understand that they pick and choose meanings for words that all the time. They vacillate back and forth between what these words mean and what they're associated with and everything else, depending on their usefulness to them at that particular time. They don't apply a consistent standard on all sorts of things. So I think that you could probably find a million clips of people talking about Bernie Sanders being a populist. I bet you could find people saying AOC is a populist candidate. I bet you can find all kinds of discussions about socialists being populists. And I think that's actually valid. I think that a lot of the modern socialists, I think Bernie Sanders is a populist. I think that Donald Trump is also a populist. I think they just have two completely different ideologies, but they're both populists within their ideological, on their ends of the ideological spectrum. So I don't think that anyone here is I don't think any of these people we're talking about are using the definition of populism accurately because it doesn't suit their purposes. So Barack Obama looks at it and thinks, well, populism has kind of a positive connotation in his mind, and I don't want to apply anything with a positive connotation to Donald Trump, right? And then Nancy Pelosi is thinking populism has a negative connotation, and I want to apply it to Donald Trump because that helps me here. In neither case are they really using a consistent definition of what populism is. And that would be true. That's probably will always be true. That's true of all sorts of different things. We see the left apply all kinds of different definitions to things all the time, like fascism. And, all of a sudden fascism doesn't mean what fascism had meant for 100 years.
Right.
It means something completely different. They just pick and choose. What they do is they create, it's more of a marketing tactic. It's more of a political slogan. That's really what it is, rather than like a fair ideological debate. So to answer the question, I don't think there has been I wouldn't say there has been an evolution in the left's feelings about populism. I think there's been an evolution in how they're using the term politically to attack other people. I don't think their feelings about the ideas of populism really have changed all that much. I would say that Occupy Wall Street was a populist movement on the left. I would say that the so-called Bernie revolution and all of that was a populist movement on the left. What we're seeing with pro-Palestinian protesters on college campuses right now was a populist movement on the left. I would say Black Lives Matters was a populist movement on the left. I think those are all populist movements. And so I don't think that during the middle of the Black Lives Matters protest that anybody would have said, oh, we shouldn't call this populism on the left. Nobody would have said that. So I think that the left likes populism when it benefits them, and they hate populism when it doesn't benefit them. But that's probably true with a lot of people on the right as well. I mean, there are a lot of people that don't like Donald Trump and criticized him on the right for being a populist and not liking populism. And then at other times, when Rand Paul, who I would argue was kind of Ron Paul was a sort of a populist candidate, a much, not as popular as these other people we're talking about, but he was still a populist candidate. That was a different ideology, and different groups of people were okay with that. So, I mean,
I think you're pointing out like a very key part of the definition that I read from ChatGPT here, that populism is a political approach, right? It's not some like set of political values necessarily, because yes, you could have populist movements on the left and the right. So, but it's just when you're listening to Nancy Pelosi during this debate, and I want to go to you, Chris. Like she just drags the idea of populism through the mud, and it feels like when you do that, then like you're almost by definition advocating for some sort of top-down approach to it. So I don't know. What do you think about that, Chris?
Yeah, I'm gonna go to the history here. So the populist movement gained momentum in the United States in the late 1800s under the Gilded Age era, because there was a lot of farmers, especially in the West and the Southwest, who thought that the way that the economy was working at that point in time was kind of screwing them. That was the origins of the populist movement. Populists originally formed the People's Party. They had William James Bryan, who was a great orator. So that's kind of where this whole like demagogue thing kind of comes into play. He gave one of the greatest political speeches in the 19th century, the Cross of Gold speech, which is all about how big finance and big banks are screwing over the little people. So that gained a lot of momentum in the late 1800s, early 1900s. What happened to the populist movement and the People's Party? It got sucked up by the Democrats and eventually morphed into the progressive era. So there's that aspect of it. Today, what I think populism is really about is Americans being frustrated with the establishment and the status quo. Barack Obama, I think he actually did campaign as a populist, and he was going to, really bring prosperity back to the working man. He was going to unrig the economy and all this stuff. But guess what happened during Barack Obama's 8 years? Things got way worse. He did not do anything that he said he was going to do. He spawned Donald Trump and the MAGA movement. Okay, whether he likes it or not, Barack Obama spawned it. In 2016, there was a lot.
Tea Party.
Well, but there was in the 2015, 2016, in the late Obama years, there was a lot of economic uncertainty, and Americans were very concerned about all these things. Donald Trump gets elected. What happens? He actually reverses a lot of the Obama policies. And what happened as a result of that? You had broad prosperity at the bottom. You had the bottom 20% actually making more wage gains than the top 20%. Like Justin said in his excellent analysis of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, that overwhelmingly benefited the middle and working class Americans. So I think that Donald Trump definitely did key in on that economic anxiety that had been building during the Obama administration, the 8 years. And now with President Biden in place, going back to those policies, that economic anxiety has actually gotten much worse. 80% of Americans are living paycheck to paycheck. His energy policies are not helping, the poor and the middle class. They're definitely helping his politically connected donors. So I think this is really just a backlash against this establishment. I don't think there's a strict ideological, angle to this. Bernie Sanders might have been trying to feed off the populist rage in 2015, 2016, but his policies would actually produce more economic harm among the very people that he was supposedly trying to help. And the fact that Bernie Sanders and President Biden got together and came up with all these joint policies. Look at what's happening now. You're getting even more of a backlash. So really, I think this is just something that's been bubbling up in America for many, many decades. It's those people that feel that they are the forgotten Americans, and Donald Trump, warts and all, actually appealed to those people with his common sense economic policies of, hey, you know what? We should actually reduce regulations. Hey, you know what? We should actually produce domestic oil and gas here. Hey, you know what? We should reduce taxes. That actually did produce an economic boom for the lower and middle class. And that's why I think come 2024, November 5th, a couple months away from today, those people are going to vote overwhelmingly in favor of Trump's policies, because Trump's policies are somewhat populist in nature, because he's appealing to those people who do feel that they've been left behind. You know why? Because they have been left behind. And the establishment on both sides, the Mitt Romneys of the world and the Barack Obama and Joe Bidens of the world, are, I think, scared out of their mind that, oh no, we've unleashed this, this new class of Americans who are looking beyond their political differences and saying, what do we want? We want good jobs. We want to be able to afford a home. We want to be able to, choose the kind of car we want to drive. We want to be able to choose the kind of appliances we have in our home. And that's what this is really about.
Yeah, there was a funny comment that came up while Chris, you were talking there from Abel Windsor. It reminded me. Here, I got it right here. It reminded me of was it Johnny Carson when he's doing that? When he pulls the envelope up to his head and he's like, Tea Party, Trumpism, and ISIS. Opens it up. Obama created these, or something like that.
Mhm.
But Jim, I want your comments on this too, because I think this, like I said, this is kind of central to the whole conversation. Because it really does seem, and I don't think we have any clips of Nancy Pelosi shared here, but it really does seem like her core point during the debate was like populism equals Trump equals bad. And obviously all political parties, when they're advocating for anything, there's an element of them trying to appeal to the population. So there's definitely degrees of it all. But it just feels like if you were to kind of run that kind of worldview down its to its logical conclusion, you would have positions like, we know what's better for you. Like, we have to act on climate change. We have to get rid of cars. You might not like it, but we know what's better for you. Therefore, we're going to enforce it. And it just feels like after listening to Nancy Pelosi talk about it for her closing statements were like 15 minutes. It just seems like, is that the direction she wants the party to go in? Is like a complete non-populist direction? What do you think about this? Oh, you're not muted. You're not muted, but something's messed up. I'm going to have to go to Justin while you fix that. Justin, same question.
I don't think that she... So I think she wants populism if it benefits her side. I don't think she wants populism if it doesn't benefit her side. It's just as simple as that.
But that's like a nuance. That's like a nuanced position. She was taking a very, very just like down the line. Populism equals bad. Like that's what it came off.
But that's because she's defined populism as a part of this effort to, it's meaningless at this point. Like, her understanding of populism is gonna, if Bernie Sanders was president of the United States right now, she would say populism is the greatest thing that's ever happened. So that's my point, is it's not really about populism. I don't think she's working with a consistent definition of populism. I don't think that's really on the table for her. I would argue that in terms of the way she's going to present things publicly, I would say publicly her support or disfavor of populism will vacillate with whether or not she thinks it's politically beneficial for her side to support it or not support the idea of populism. Mm-hmm. Secretly, I think she's always opposed to populism. Really, I think that
she hates when those climate activists camp out in front of her office and yell at her.
Absolutely, Nancy Pelosi, underneath the surface, right, is absolutely an elite who wants elites running everything, and she doesn't want to be dictated to by the masses. Like, that's the last thing she wants. Okay, so right. Unlike with, say, Bernie Sanders, who I think probably does want that, and unlike with AOC, who I think feels comfortable with that as well, they just want the masses to agree with them about socialism first, but they want that sort of a popular uprising type thing. They don't want, look, how many times have you and I talked about this, Donald, where when you look at the World Economic Forum, Davos meetings, stuff like that, is Bernie Sanders at Davos? Nope. No. Is AOC at Davos? Nope. Greta Thunberg's at Davos. She's outside banging a drum talking about how terrible everybody is inside, right? That's because they're not really in good with the elites. The elites use them when it benefits them, and sure, they use elites when it benefits their own causes. But they're not really elites. That doesn't mean they're good people. Like, Karl Marx was probably not an elite, at least not at first. but he's still a terrible person. It doesn't, you know, and I don't agree with any of his ideology. But Nancy Pelosi is an elite who doesn't like populism, but
Right.
she's going to say populism is good or bad depending on who people associate that label with.
You should.
So the idea
wait.
she goes to the Oxford, you know, debate society, the Oxford Union, and she's debating this as though she has some sort of academic opinion about it is completely ridiculous. She has no
Right.
academic opinions about anything. It's all just going to go with whatever direction the political winds are blowing. It's all going to change for her, and that's how that.
Justin, I think you just raised a really important point, and that's because what Bernie Sanders was campaigning on in 2016 and again in 2020 was the same thing that that Trump is about the elites, the economy being rigged, and all that kind of stuff. And I am very sympathetic to like the problems he's describing. However, I completely disagree with the solutions he's advocating to those problems. If you look back at the original populist movement in the United States, it did have definite socialist elements to it. They wanted to nationalize the banks. They wanted to nationalize some industries. They wanted to nationalize other parts of the American economy. They wanted to inflate the currency because they thought if they back the currency with silver and gold, that will produce more money, and that they would then benefit from that. So once again, I think that the frustrated Americans in 2016 who were going for Bernie and going for Trump actually have a lot more in common than they have apart. And Hillary Clinton, she embodied the establishment and the Barack Obama's like third term. And I still think to this day that the media and the elites and academia and Hollywood and all these institutions were just shocked and just could not comprehend that the American people elected Donald Trump because he was the only person in that field. Because remember, there was a really crowded field of Republicans in 2016 primaries who was saying, you know what, actually the economy is rigged. You know what, these politicians have been making promises to you for decades. They never followed through. I'm an outsider. Give me a shot. And look what happened when we gave him a shot. But then also look at how much the establishment went out of their way to say, we are going to make sure that he fails. Because I think that he represented an existential threat to their iron grip on power. And so did Bernie Sanders. And that's why Bernie Sanders, like him or hate him, and I am not a fan of Bernie Sanders' policies by any means, he got treated terribly in the 2016 primary with Clinton and in 2020 as well. That just goes to show you that the establishment, the Washington, D.C., the permanent class, the bureaucracy, the deep state, whatever you want to call it, they all are working in cahoots to keep the status quo in place because the status quo benefits them and it does not benefit average, hardworking, everyday Americans. And that's what this is all about, in my opinion.
Yeah, I gotta let Jim back in. I think he's got his mic fixed up here, but there's an element of this too that I think, like I said, populism. You're trying to get people to vote for you, so everyone has to appeal to it to some degree. But I feel like, and maybe I'm setting up a straw man here, so feel free to reality check me here. But I feel like, at least recently, from like Trump's perspective, there's like an attempt to appeal to everybody. Like the idea of like, what do you've been voting Democrat for the last like several decades. Like, what do you have to lose? Like, vote for me sort of thing. Whereas on the left, I feel like they're much more comfortable in just like writing off half of the country. Like, none of these people are going to vote for me. And there were certain comments that Nancy Pelosi had during this debate that kind of resembled that whole idea of, like Hillary Clinton writing off half the country as like a basket of deplorables or whatever, where Nancy Pelosi said that she suggested that Americans refuse to listen to Democrats on certain issues due to their beliefs about guns, gays, and God. And just like, that's just dripping with disdain for like half of the country. So I feel like that is also kind of a at least partial rejection of like populism when you're not even trying to appeal to anyone that's like outside of your party at all. So what do you think, Jim? Am I painting a straw man here? Oh, Jim, I'd set you up. You're just gonna have to pull
Donnie,
the plug on him over
just
here.
real quick. I think you're not setting up a straw man by any means, because guess what? Nancy Pelosi looks down upon those people. She really does, and so do a lot of establishment Republicans in my mind. Sorry.
There you go, Jim. Yeah. There you go. Jump in.
You can hear me now? Okay, geez. I don't know what's going on with my...
We did it. Success.
I don't know what's going on with my soundboard. That's really weird stuff. So, yeah, you popped into my office yesterday and we talked a little bit about this. And I said, I said, Nancy Pelosi's attitude, this goes back a decent long way. I said, do you remember the book, What's the Matter with Kansas? What was it? Thomas Frank, I think, was an economist. And there started this argument, if you want to call it one, from the left and especially the Democratic Party, that anybody who is middle class or, maybe has an annual income of $50,000 a year, or whatever, let's just say whatever the median income is in the United States. None of those people should ever vote for any Republican. They should all be voting for Democrats. And people like Nancy Pelosi, and she said it in this debate, she is perplexed, she claims, and Obama is the same way, why all these people would be voting against their own interests. And the reason why Donald Trump's Make America Great Again messaging in 2016 resonated so much, especially people who are not wealthy, blue collar, they used to call them Reagan Democrats back in the 80s. The reason that message resonated is because he did not express contempt for people or tell them that they're wrong and that they need to vote for me because you're voting against your own interests because of this childish caricature of Republicans or conservatives being the monopoly man or mustache twirling villains exploiting the underclass and all this other nonsense. These the people that voted for Donald Trump, that are blue collar traditional Democrat voters, the ones that frankly that RFK is now trying to go after, it would appear, they think it is in their interest to have the government leave them the hell alone. That's in their interests. They think it's in their interests to not be forced to buy an electric vehicle that they cannot afford. They think it's in their interest to not have runaway inflation going on as far as the eye can see. And so it's this looking down upon, the ordinary Americans, ordinary people. That seems to be the defining political stance of a Nancy Pelosi. And gosh almighty, playing that clip of Barack Obama made my head hurt again. I just was a reminder of why that guy is completely insufferable in the way he talks down to people. That why is Donald Trump a populist? Well, I just explained why, because he actually has respect and wants to improve the lives of ordinary Americans, if you want to put it that way. And the elites that are now, the Democratic Party and the left are the elites. They run everything. And, poor people in this country, laid off auto workers, thousands of them because of the transition to electric vehicles in Michigan. They don't think that it was in their interest to mandate electric vehicles so that they all lose their jobs. So, this, and the reason why now they're trying to, well, again, back in 2016, Obama was trying to still claim the mantle of populist because he understood then, and I think it's still true now, that populism has a lot of wide appeal. Popular is part of the word. It's why, and it's a danger to the ruling class, because if the popular election, if populism, if it resonates with ordinary people who are sick and tired of the elites running our economy and our education system and even Hollywood into the ground, then that is a huge threat to their power. And so that's why you are now seeing, and maybe we'll play another clip or two from this debate, this idea that populism leads to January 6th, or populism leads to, a plot to kidnap Gretchen Whitmer, or all this other kind of crazy stuff that they talk about, because populism leads to nationalism, or populism leads to patriotism, which leads to nationalism, which leads to the Third Reich and gas chambers or something. I don't know, this ridiculous chain that they are trying to sell people. The media buys it, but I don't think ordinary people buy it.
Justin, I want your take on kind of the distinction that I was making between like the appeal to everybody versus the appeal to just your side. And just like one more little thing I was thinking about that kind of highlights that is and again, feel free to fact check me on here, but if I recall correctly, one of Bill Clinton's campaign things that he used to say was, talking about the economy and kind of empathizing with like the people that are struggling. I feel your pain, sort of thing, right? He's trying to like understand why these people are feeling that way. Compared to today, where it's like, oh yeah, you think the economy is doing bad and you think that you're spending more money on groceries than ever, you're just wrong. Your eyes are deceiving you. You're just wrong. And I feel like those are like two distinct approaches to the idea of people, constituents like having concerns or issues with what's going on. It's like an empathy. We're trying to see where you're coming from versus no, we're telling you you're wrong and we know what's best. So again, what do you think? Am I making a straw man here?
No, I mean, I think this is such a complicated topic in some ways, because I could imagine a scenario where you could have a populist doing that exact thing once they come into power and their ideas aren't working. Like, for example, if Bernie Sanders came into power as a populist and he started, instituting his various socialistic policies, and let's say those policies didn't work, do you think he would suddenly say, oh yeah, you know what, I was wrong, and you guys are now there's a lot of people who are mad about it and they're right, and I just go with whatever the most people believe? No, obviously not. He would probably tell them, actually, this is working really well. Everybody has, health coverage now, and they didn't before. And sure, there's long lines and rationing and all of that, but that's not as big as, you know what I mean? They would find reasons, even populists would find reasons for spinning things so that they're telling people who are the majority of people what they should or shouldn't believe. I think to a large extent that's probably just politics, more than anything else. I think that populism can be a really bad thing, and I think in this discussion we've spent a lot of time kind of talking about how it's a good thing, almost as sort of the the foundation that a lot of us are working on. And I think that's because right now there's a lot about populism that's good because the elites are totally out of control. And so we look at that and we say, yeah, it makes a lot of sense. Populism makes a lot of sense. But a lot of the worst things, the worst ideas, the worst policy changes that America has ever enacted were the result of populist ideas, movement.
Right.
And
that run amok, it leads some people on the conservative side to like want to go back to the direction of like, to the extreme of like bring back the monarchy, like that sort of stuff.
Yeah. So I think populism is good insofar that it is elevating ideas that actually work. But if populism is elevating ideas that are bad for people, then it's not good. Like almost every socialist revolution came out of a populist movement. That's not a good thing.
Don't you think that we, like specifically on this podcast, are inherently more sympathetic to the idea of populism because that's the realm that we play in? Like, we're very specifically out there trying to like encourage the population to accept good ideas and reject bad ones. Like, that's the realm that we on this podcast do like on a weekly basis.
I think that
no. I not necessarily, because I think what populism is sort of the overarching idea of it is we're going to be our political positions, our policy prescriptions are driven not by an ideological foundation consistent ideological foundation, but rather it's whatever we think is going to help the masses against the elites, right? And so I think that it can be good when those policy prescriptions align with policies that will actually empower individual people, make everyone wealthy, et cetera. But when it leads to socialism, it's bad, right? Mm-hmm. And so I don't know that we necessarily look at this from a populist perspective. I don't think our show actually does that. I think all of us would take positions that even if they were wildly unpopular, we would still take the position, even if we were in the tiny minority. And I don't think you could really say that about a populist. I don't think a populist generally is
I'm saying that
our hardline ideological position that most people don't want.
Our approach is it plays into the idea of populism, where we're trying to get the audience and everyone, the general public that would theoretically be listening to our show, accept good ideas so that it would push through in a populist type setting. I think our ideas would push forward. I think that's what I'm saying.
I think to some extent, yes. I would say mostly because our ideology is inherently anti-centralization of power and control and all of that stuff. So we have the advantage of being able to almost always be against the elites, which oftentimes means there's going to be a lot of crossover with populism. Whereas someone like Barack Obama, sometimes he's going to be favoring policies that are in line with what elites want, and sometimes he's not. And so it's vacillating in and out a lot more often than people like us because of our ideology. I think
Jim,
that's part of the
Jim. We're gonna go long here. But I do want to play a few more of these clips if possible. So
can I just add just super quick, just real quick? First of all, I think it's ironic that a billionaire named Donald Trump is the face of the working man who's so frustrated with what's been happening over the years. But I also think that we should not forget that when it comes to the plight of the working man, and they have been just destroyed and devastated in recent years. What was the Democrat Party's response? Go learn how to code. It's just like you idiot. Just go learn how to code. But Donald Trump is saying no. There's dignity. These people want to go lay concrete. They want to be go lay bricks. And it's a builder, so I think understands where they're coming from. They take pride in their work. And I still think that populism is more an outgrowth of this economic anxiety, because it also came about in the 1930s. And FDR, he definitely absorbed the populist, agenda. But I still think that back then, at least FDR tried to empathize with those people. He had the fireside chats. He didn't just say, "You idiots," there's this new economic order in place, and you're just going to have to just get on board with it. So I think that really what is inflaming so many Americans today is the fact that our political leaders, and Nancy Pelosi, I think, is such a great example of this, and a bad example of this, is that she's just saying, just shut up and just be happy with what crumbs we give you, while she's living in a mansion in San Francisco, high on the hill, and trading stocks inside, and making tens of millions of dollars. And it's just like, oh, you peons, just be happy with what you have.
Jim, let's do one more clip. We've got a couple here, but pick your favorite, set it up, and go ahead and hit play on it.
Yeah, well, we're gonna go with the third clip I had from Winston Marshall, and he talks about other populist movements. This would be number 3.
Let's look at some of the other.
We'll go with Marshall number 3. Just hold on, just let me set up a little bit. So he's gonna outline some other populist movements around the world, and he gives a great what I really think is the best definition of populism at the very end of this clip. So all right, here we go.
Let's look at some of the other populist movements. The Hong Konger populist revolt is literally called the pro-democracy movement. The farmer revolts from Netherlands to Germany, France, Greece to Sri Lanka. Farmers are taking their tractors to the road to protest ESG policy that's floated down to us from those all-knowing, infallible elites of Davos. The trucker movement in Canada became anti-elitist when petty tyrant Prime Minister Justin Trudeau froze their bank accounts, not the behavior of a democratic head of state. The Gilets jaunes in France, ULEZ in London, working people protesting policy that hurt them. And how are they treated? They're called conspiracy theorists. They're called far right, by the mayor as well. Ladies and gentlemen, populism is the voice of the voiceless. The real threat to democracy is from the elites.
Now,
Okay.
I'll remind you that the question on the table in this Oxford debate was, is populism a threat to democracy? And I agree very much with Winston Marshall, where he says populism, as defined commonly in our political discourse, is the voice of the people. It's the voice of the voiceless. It is generally kind of like people that feel like their last resort is to vote for somebody like Donald Trump to upend the entire system, because the system has been crushing them in their lives, and they're left with no other choice. I mean, I think a lot of people voted for Donald Trump, not necessarily because they loved him and thought he was great, although he did have lots and lots of fans, and a lot of people warmed up to him over time, but because they felt the alternative was electing somebody president who thinks half the country belongs in a basket of deplorables. And now we have an election coming up where we have the sitting president of the United States calling half the country semi-fascist. And we have the media calling them maggots instead of, with M-A-G-A, maggots. I mean, it's, if you want populism, this is how you get it. If you want that populism to turn into something not as peaceful, this is also how you get it. Hopefully the voting is what's going to change things, because that's, the voiceless are going to be speaking very soon.
Okay, so I was thinking about this. So obviously, I think we've said this multiple times, populism isn't necessarily inherently a good thing. It could be a populist movement to bring in communism, right? So it's more of a strategy, a way of going about things than anything, right? So obviously, there could be populist movements that we're against, populist movements that we're supporting. But like I was trying to say, I think that we, specifically on this podcast, are in the business of trying to make sure that populist movement is going in the proper direction. And I think a rejection of populism leads to that top-down authoritarian dictate. If the population isn't doing what we want them to, we're just going to force them to do it. So I think while populism, I'm not going to blanketly support everything because it's populist, but a rejection of populism, I think, leads to probably some of the most authoritarian tendencies that you could have imagined. We're already north of an hour, so Justin or Chris, feel free to disagree or riff off of what I just said there. But I think that's kind of my core point.
I think it just depends entirely on the context. So so for example, the reason that we have a constitutional republic is, and not just a direct democracy that doesn't have a constitution, is precisely so that in a case where you have 75% of people who say we just want to take away this minority group's ability to speak freely, there is an establishment that says no, you can't do that. That's the whole structure of the system. That's in that case you would say the elites, the establishment, is protecting the rights of the individual. That's what you would be saying in that circumstance. And we've had situations like that in history where the minority view is really unpopular, and yet we need our courts and we need our law enforcement, by extension, to protect those people's rights, even in the event that they're saying something that's unpopular. So I would not say I don't have a super high opinion of populism. I have a high opinion of ideology that takes power away from elites and empowers the individual. And sometimes populist movements support that kind of thing, and a lot of other times, quite a bit. I would say a lot of other times they don't. Right. I would say most populist movements actually are probably bad in the grand scheme of history. If you were just to look back at them, I would say most of them probably bad. So I don't know that that's necessarily the way to think about these things. And really, I would argue that the debate question, the whole sort of premise of the debate, is really not a very good debate question, because again, what kind of populism? Can populism be a threat to democracy? Yeah. If the populism is the populism that led to Benito Mussolini becoming dictator, then yeah, it is a threat to democracy. That can happen. But in the present context, most populist movements are not that, right? So it just depends. So to frame it in that way of is populism good or bad for democracy is like just a really poor way, I think, of them setting up the whole question.
Right.
And
right.
so while I agree, I obviously don't agree with Nancy Pelosi ideologically or about this specific issue, I would not say that populism is never a threat to democracy. It certainly can be. And I would never say that the opposite is true either. So I just think that that's the part of all of this that's kind of missing sometimes from these conversations about it.
I think that's a very good point, Chris. Consider this your final comments for the episode.
Just real quick. So I think Justin really just hit the nail on the head. And what I agree with him on is I'm much more concerned with what are the symptoms behind the populist movement. So you could go back to Imperial Russia and say why was there this populist drive against the Tsar? Well, that's because the Tsar was not a good ruler and he did not rule the people very well. But look what that like morphed into. It morphed into Bolshevikism. So that's where people who felt, okay, the system's worked against us, we're really frustrated, we want a new system. Yeah, they're right, but their solution to the problem was wrong. I think the same thing you can say is happening now, where and this is happening, I think, in European countries and all across the world. You've got a lot of people, a significant amount of the population, who are saying we're frustrated with the way things are. We're frustrated with the economy being rigged. We're frustrated with big banks having too much power. We're frustrated with like all this stuff, big government, big tech, and all this stuff. However, what is the solution to it? So I think populism is more about saying, why are these people frustrated? What are their frustrations? What are the source of their frustrations? And how do we solve those problems? Instead of saying populism in and of itself is a good thing or a bad thing. To me, it's more of a symptom that the system is, having major problems. And the thing that I'm much more focused on is, well, how do we solve those problems? What are the best solutions to give people more agency, more power, and just like Justin said, we live in a constitutional republic. So what if 60% of the people said, well, we just think that we should take all the wealth from the people who have it all? That's very populist. However, we know that that's, not in American, principles at all whatsoever. But I think what Donald Trump has tapped into is that populist, the feeling among so many Americans that, hey, I am not being listened to. The economy is not, working for me anymore. Washington, D.C. does not care about me. And I need someone to basically take my cause and try to, solve it. And I do agree with most of Donald Trump's solutions to the problem, because his solutions are in line with limited government and conservative principles.
Yeah, Jim, I mean, I think these are all very good points. I'm going to give you kind of the last words for the show, since this is kind of the you brought this topic to my attention. But I do feel like it's a very interesting conversation. I feel like even just between us four, who agree on probably 90% of stuff, it's brought a lot of thoughts to my attention. And it's the conversations like this that I think are severely lacking in this country, where everyone's just like very content with just kind of running to their corner and demonizing the other side and not trying to figure out why they think one way or another. But again, final thoughts for you before we wrap up the show, sir.
Well, it's pretty easy to find that entire debate on YouTube and probably Rumble as well, if you just put in Winston Marshall Oxford debate. I thought he destroyed what can barely be called arguments from Nancy Pelosi. And yet, of course, by a show of hands, she won. Her side won the debate, which is, I think, more of an indictment on education in Britain than it is on the performance of Winston Marshall. But what you're going to see between now and November is a variation of this. The idea, and that's why Justin bringing up populism isn't always great, because it, as popular movements have led to some pretty bad outcomes. But what our modern Democratic Party and Nancy Pelosi is saying today is that if ordinary people are fed up with the misrule of the elites, we are governed by the worst elites since the fall of the Roman Empire. If ordinary people get sick of that and vote another way, or don't continue to vote for the elites from either party to run their lives, that kind of populism presents a grave threat to democracy. That is not true. And but you're going to keep hearing this argument. You're going to keep hearing these insults. They're not done calling half this country deplorable, because that's what they really think. And so if we are to remain a people with a government and not the other way around, we're just going to have to see how this next election turns out, because we've been marching too far in the wrong direction of elites now showing absolute contempt for the people they rule over. They used to pretend. Obama was maybe the last pretender, and he was only half pretending to care about what the American people thought, because he was wafted up by the media and everybody else as this hope and change and light bringer and all of that stuff. It's easy to hide your contempt for the people when you are feted in such a way. But the mask, COVID and otherwise, has long slipped. And so the people now see the elite for what they are. People who have no care in the world for what their policies do to ordinary people. And that's how you get a new populist movement in the United States of America.
Right. All right. Hour 15, guys. Any last words, anecdotes, anything you want to get off your chest before we wrap up the show?
The current strain of populism is a global thing. It's not just happening in the United States, and it's a response to globalism, and it's a response to the World Economic Forum and the United Nations and all these international organizations saying we know best, and if you don't agree with us and you aren't on board with our agenda, well, then you just better, just wise up. And the American people and people in Europe and people all over the world are saying, no, actually, we're not on board with your agenda, and we can do better than this, and we're going to vote you out of office. And that is what I think they're scared of.
Well, if you had any final comments, keep them to yourself, because you're not going to top that. Thank you all for tuning into this episode of the In the Tank podcast. Join us every week for a new episode. For those audio-only listeners that are probably catching the show on a Friday or later, write a review for us on iTunes. That'd be greatly appreciated. And join us on Thursdays at noon Central Time, where we are live streaming this on Facebook and YouTube and Rumble and X. Join the conversation. Throw your comments and questions in the chat. Maybe we'll show your comment on the screen. Maybe we'll address your questions on the fly. Also, you can help out the show just by doing a couple of things: hitting that like button, sharing this content, subscribing if you haven't already, leaving a comment under this video. All these things help break through the big tech algorithms and prevent content like this from being shown to more people. If you'd like, you can follow us on X at In The Tank Pod. You can send us your comments, suggestions, or questions to the show by emailing us at inthetankpodcast@gmail.com. Jim Lakely, where can the fine people find you?
At Jay Lakely on Twitter, at Heartland Inst on Twitter, and always go to heartland.org.
Fantastic. Justin Haskins, same question.
At Justin T. Haskins, everywhere.
Everywhere.
Absolutely everywhere. I'm everywhere.
even OnlyFans. Chris Talgo, Chris Talgo, what do you have to pitch today?
Heartland.org. Go check it out. Great stuff up there. Really great stuff.
Fantastic. Thank you all for tuning in. We'll talk to you next week.